Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Deck Musings. So, in this episode, we have effectively, I suppose, come full circle in that we've been back in episodes to earlier time periods. We're moving forward and we're actually back up to a time period which we've covered in a previous episode. So it's around about here. So Visions has just been released. And if we put this on the sort of Pro Tour timeline, we're going to be talking about Pro Tour Paris again. Now, we've spoken about it in a previous video because I mentioned about Prosperous Bloom. Although, if you remember, for that particular episode, we did use a later Prosperous Bloom deck to talk about the deck. But there are a number of other interesting things going on around about this time, not just Prosperous Bloom. I'm going to be talking about the Paul Ferker deck, which we'll see in a moment. And I suppose primarily this particular Pro Tour, as it says here in the article, which I'll include a link to, is filled with all sorts of stories. The biggest one revolves around the final between Mark Justice and Mike Long. What I'll probably do for this is I'll repost that infamous final or a link to it in the description, even though we're not going to be talking about a deck that featured in the final, but just so you can see it if you haven't watched it in the previous video where I specifically covered the Prosperous Bloom archetype. The other thing, it does actually mention it down here, and this is another rabbit hole you can go down amongst many rabbit holes in Magic's history, and that's the whole sort of play, draw, roll, Paris Mulligan, and you know, actually the first time it occurred, and then subsequently over the years, how things like that connected with, you know, the start of the game, if you like, how they may or may not have changed over time. The other interesting thing about this particular Pro Tour event is that it's block constructed, but it's just Mirage and Visions, so the first two sets of the block. The deck I'm going to be musing over today is this Aggression deck. It's a mono red deck, so it looks very much like a Sly deck, a sort of red deck wins of the time period, but of course it's constrained by the fact that it can only use cards from the first two sets of the Mirage block. And here in the MTG top 8 entry, it's actually referred to as Aggression. You can also see there's quite a number of Prosperous Bloom decks, although here they're called Bloom Drain. And if we actually look at one again, let me try and bring this back here. You can see it has, you know, Drain Life in it. But I'll just quickly click through, see what else we've got here. So what do we got here? This looks like a black-red deck called Voodoo. Another Bloom deck, something called Sumu, which is Darwin Castle's deck, or Sumu. It's blue-red. Three-colour black. And it's interesting because some of the other episodes we've done around this time have covered similar-ish types of deck, but just with a wider card pool. So it's interesting to see certain things in Pro Tour Paris where, you know, apart from the Bloom Drain decks, the Prosperous Bloom decks, yeah, they're like a restricted version to some degree of other archetypes. So aggression, as I've said, you know, mono red. We've got a big blue deck. We've looked at big blue decks before, and you'll probably see similar creatures. And then there's another Bloom Drain deck. So here's the deck that we're going to be talking about today. So let's do what I normally do. We'll organise this in grid format, and I'll go through these. There's probably a few here we have spoken about before. Incinerate, Fireblast. I will skip over those maybe as is necessary. We've got a sideboard again in this episode. So let's have a look. 21 creatures in the deck, and you can see, you know, anything from 4-ofs to 1-ofs. And I'm just looking actually to see how much that is really dependent on where they are on the curve, whether there is a tailing off. I suspect not only that, it's also the utility of the card, and, you know, obviously what the probability you want of it turning up earlier in the game. So we have 3 Goblin Soothsayers, single red, it's a 1/1, red and tap, sacrifice a goblin. All red creatures get +1/+1 until end of turn. We've got another 1-drop in the form of Keeper of Kookus, single red, 1/1, red, protection from red until end of turn. Dwarven Miner, 1 and a red, so it's our 2-drop, one of our 2-drops. 2 and a red, tap, destroy target non-basic land, and it's a 1/2. Another 2-drop 1/2 here in the form of Goblin Tinkerer, so red, tap, destroy target artifact. That artifact deals an amount of damage equal to its casting cost to Goblin Tinkerer. So we've got some interesting utility so far on all the first 4 cards. And we come to our 3-drops. So Searing Spear, Askari's 2 and a red, it's a 2/2. It has flanking, so with flanking, whenever a creature without flanking is assigned to block this creature, the blocking creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. And 1 and a red, Searing Spear, Askari cannot be blocked by only one creature this turn. We've got 4 Suq'Ata Lancers, I think that is 2 and a red for a 2/2. The knight has flanking again, and it's unaffected by summoning sickness. So haste, as we would now call it. That's haste. Viashino Sandstalker, 1 and 2 red for a 4/2. It is unaffected by summoning sickness, but clearly there must be some downside to getting a 4/2 on turn 3 potentially. And that is, at the end of any turn, return Viashino Sandstalker to owner's hand. So you can see why the haste would be important here. And then we've got Talruum Minotaur, so 2 and 2 red. So in terms of the creatures, the top of the curve, 4-drop. It's a 3/3, so 3/3 for 4, but it is unaffected by summoning sickness. Got some instants, 9 of them. There's 1 Final Fortune, which is 2 red. Take another turn after this one. You lose the game at the end of that turn. Okay, Incinerate, 4 of those, 1 and a red. It deals 3 damage to target creature or player. Creature damaged by Incinerate cannot regenerate this turn. I think we've seen this on and off in various decks featuring red in this series, or cards similar to that. Then we have Fireblast, and you might see some similarities with other cards in different colours. So I believe this was part of a cycle actually at some point. So 4 and 2 red, you may sacrifice 2 mountains instead of paying Fireblast casting cost. Fireblast deals 4 damage to target creature or player. I might be getting muddled up actually. Well, we'll see, but this sounds very similar to other cards, which will have an alternative cost, or you can get it into play. So we'll see if that comes up as a tag. 19 mountains and then 4 quicksand. So with Quicksand, tap, add 1 colourless mana to your mana pool. You can also tap it, but you have to sacrifice it, and it will get, for a target attacking creature without flying, it will get -1, -2 until end of turn. We've then got 7 sorceries, 3, I'm going to mangle this, Kaervek's Torch, X and a red. So scalable X spell interrupts the target Kaervek's Torch. Each costs an additional 2 to play. So there's a bit of like a downside there for anybody trying to target this. Something that makes it a bit harder there. And this deals X damage to target creature or player. So you can see similarities between this and, say, a card like Fireball. And then we've got Hammer of Bogardan, which is 1 and 2 red. It deals 3 damage to target creature or player. But then down here you have this other cost, which is 2 and 3 red, where you can actually return from the graveyard Hammer of Bogardan to your hand, because you can only use the ability only during your upkeep and only if it's in the graveyard. And then we've got 15 sideboard cards. I don't see any here that are additions to cards that are already in the main deck. So let's see what we have. So we've got something clearly here that helps deal with artifacts. It's an XX red spell, so destroy X target artifacts. For each artifact put into the graveyard in this way, Builder's Bane deals 1 damage to that artifact's controller. We've got Tremor, single red, deals 1 damage to each creature without flying. Wand of Denial, 2 of those, 2 to cast. Tap, look at the top card of target player's library. If that card is a non-land card, you may pay 2 life to put it into that player's graveyard. Wildfire Emissary, 3 and a red, protection from white, 1 and a red, +1/+0 until end of turn. It's a 2/4. Bogardan Phoenix, 2 and 3 red, it's a 3/3. So quite a high cost here. So what's that? 5 drop for a 3/3. It does have flying, and also if it's put into any graveyard from play and there's no death counter on it, you can return it to play and put a death counter on it. And if Bogardan Phoenix is put into a graveyard from play and it has a death counter on it, remove it from the game. And if you think through the history of Magic, you could probably think of other mechanics, other abilities that are similar in nature to that, in terms of using counters to indicate whether it's done the first bit. In this case it's died, gone to the graveyard, it's come back, death counter goes on it. But I'm sure you can think of other sets which have a similar graveyard based counter system. Sand Golem, it's 5 to cast, it's a 3/3. If a spell or effect controlled by an opponent causes you to discard Sand Golem, put Sand Golem from your graveyard into play at the end of turn with a +1/+1 counter on it. And then Subterranean Spirit, 3 and 2 red for a 3/3. Protection for red, tap, Subterranean Spirit deals 1 damage to each creature without flying. So it's interesting, you can see there are actually quite a number of 5 drops which don't have necessarily a corresponding power and toughness. Admittedly, on creatures, you know, the power and toughness of creatures was slightly lesser than it is, say, today. But you can see, to make up for it, they have interesting additional abilities on them. Some are a bit more corner casey than others, maybe. But obviously, clearly they're in the sideboard to deal with certain matchups. So, as I always say, probably the most important cards in the deck, well, the most important cards in the deck, the basic lands. And here we have a really nice set of mountain artwork from that set, from Mirage. Very nice. And we have Quicksand. This has only existed in a couple of pieces of artwork. I'm just trying to think. Yeah, so the first time I would have seen it would have been 10th edition, and then I did open a number of World Wake packs. So then there was this one. So I've opened packs containing both. They repeated this World Wake artwork in Conspiracy, and then for Masters 25 they went back to the original artwork. And you can see, in addition to Visions, it's cropped up in the World Champ decks from 98, and then 9th edition, 10th edition for the core sets. So let's have a look at the tags. 8 attacker, sacrifice self, utility land, remove creature toughness, and single English word name. We have looked at this card before in previous episodes, but I am going to go a little bit too, because I think, you know, I'm always really interested in utility lands. And what I think I'll do here is I'm just going to look at utility lands which are colourless, I think. So we'll do ID. So those lands which don't generate any mana of any colour, but do generate colourless mana, and also have a utility on them of some description. Now this may well also include, so let's try and screen out something else here. Just want to look at the wording on here. I'm going to try this, because there may be some here that actually don't generate mana at all. We did spend a bit of an episode, I think, on that at some point, or I did feature in an episode. So let's just look at those. Oh, type. Of course, it's that we want, isn't it? First printing. Copy that to the clipboard. Oh yes, desert, yes, of course. Yeah, some nice early stuff here. Including things like strip mine. It's interesting, isn't it? These earlier ones, I find often I just completely forget about them, particularly this period. Yeah, of course, I'm not saying any of these are super powerful, but I don't know, just there is something about the artwork. Interesting interesting as well, isn't it? We've got a few here from Mercadian Masks. Now, Mercadian Masks, I think, as a set, was notoriously underpowered because the Arza block was stupidly overpowered. I could spend ages looking at these. I just love, I don't know what it's about utility lands. Particularly these ones, because they, they generate mana of any colour. If they do have an activation cost, it's going to be... Sorry, let me roll that back. I misspoke there. They generate colourless mana, and also the activation costs, if they do indeed have one, can be mana of any colour. So they can go in any deck. See, now I'm curious. Do we have... So let's just see. What would that be? That would be 5, wouldn't it? So is that the case that, yeah, there's only one 5 colour utility land? I just take that out. That might be muddying the water a bit. Yeah. And this one does actually generate green mana. Oh, very cool. So 141 of these. What's the most recent thing? The Grey Havens. It's also nice with this sort of stuff as well. You do think about, there's potential for little collections here. So, this thing in Magic the Gathering, if you are more interested in the card aesthetics, both in terms of the artwork and, I think there's an aesthetics to, the rules or however you want to think of them. And yeah, maybe picking a certain area within Magic, like this, for instance, and collecting cards that fit into that category of card, I think is quite an interesting thing to do if you've got restricted budget. Although, of course, with these, I imagine a lot of these are pretty expensive. Like we've got a Library of Alexander, so this probably isn't the best example of that. But certainly you can pick other things. I mean, if we get a bit more niche, so what if we said we restrict ourselves to rarity? How much is one of those? Well, that's $12. Has been reprinted, but it would be nice to have the original one. So it's a bit narrow, isn't it? 16 there. So those are all the commons that sort of fall into that category of being completely colourless utility lands that also generate mana. I mean, we could just take off this requirement, see if we get slightly more. Same. So if we then move to, say, uncommons, there's 48. See, Library of Alexander, how much is that? Oh, yeah, no. It's a bridge too far. It's a wasteland now. Let's see. I don't know, it's a nice little collection, isn't it? I'm assuming all of these are pretty reasonable prices. Yeah, I've gone off down a complete rabbit hole here, but never mind. I suppose I could have actually, that wasn't very, there we go, that's much better. I'm flicking backwards and forwards. Get a quick overview. This one's been reprinted quite a few times. So here, just to recap, we're only looking at the commons here that fall into that category. Choose target commander that enters the battlefield this turn. Put a 1/1 counter on it if it's a creature, and a loyalty counter on it if it's a planeswalker. Okay. Right, moving on. Final Fortune. So let's have a look at that. So it's an instant. Take an extra turn after this one. $21. Right. What are we going to uncover? Alliteration, extra turn, alternate lost condition, and last chance. Better than last chance. Take an extra turn after this one. You lose the game. The beginning of that turn's end step. And then we've got a Warrior's Oath. Better than Warrior's Oath. Turn's end step. So let's look and see what falls under the... so yeah, there's only 6 here and they're all in red. Well, there's a red-white one. Red cards that manipulate the turn cycle then kill you. Okay, fair enough. Let me just bring that up for a bit better there so you can see them all. There we go. There's a few extra added bits in here, and there's one here that's actually the colour identity is blue-red. You got Glorious End, which is slightly more expensive. Beginning of that turn's end step, you lose the game. Oh, of course, yeah, this is now I see. Okay, 'cause this is an instant, these are sorceries, right? That makes perfect sense now. I was trying to work out why it said they were. Why it's better than these, and it's because it's at instant speed as opposed to sorcery. Which these two are. The extra turn thing, probably more used to seeing that in blue. Without a downside, like on Final Fortune. Of course, did I actually remember to find it? There we go. Although we can see a number of different colours that allow you to take extra turns. I'm assuming if I was just to quickly go through the colour pie, for certain colours it's only because they're either in combination with red or blue. Lots of blue ones there. What about black? Oh, there's a mono black one. And with the, I always find it difficult with the black ones to tell whether these are the time shifted cards or not for playing a chaos. I think they are, aren't they? Oh, sorry, colour shifted. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's the inner border, I think, is the way of telling, and on some cards it's harder than others. Red, and what about green? Oh, siege time. Yeah, okay. Conditional though. Kaervek's torch. Better than blaze. So you got this additional thing here. Hate counter spell. So that's where there's some, you know, condition or prevention on the something that prevents opponents from basically countering it. Burn any, yeah, it burns anything. And then we've got this frost armor business. Spells costed, yeah, additional mana to target stuff you control. Okay, so that's another term. I think, yeah, we have seen that in and I've looked at, you know, these X red spells before, so I think I'll leave it at that for that one. Hammer of Bogardan, another one. I always have a look in just to see if there's anything been added since we last looked at it. Similar to repeating Barrage. That one has Raid on it. There's an extra condition there about returning it. That just means it's referenced by regrowth self, another burn any, activate from the graveyard. Again, there's a number of cards in Magic where the abilities can be activated from the graveyard. In terms of something that, you know, you might see in red, particularly in this case, I suppose we're more interested in mono red. There's 25 cards that have something that can be activated from the graveyard. Hell's Thunder. Fireblast, I think another card we've definitely looked at before. So this is the one I was trying to remember whether particularly there's similar ones, and in this particular set it's not part of a cycle. I mean, it's what's referred to as a pitch spell. And if we look at a CMC for, let's just go back. Oh, CMC 6. Okay. CMC6 pitch spells. So obviously nothing, I mean with the pitch spells you can see that often they tend to appear at, not surprisingly, the higher manas. So if we go through this, so we've got 21 cards for 28 cards at 5, 12, so a bit of a blip there. And back to 6. So what is it? The sweet spot for these, or the most amount, tends to be around 4 drop. And this is probably the style of pitch we're maybe used to seeing, or we've seen in the past, from way back in Magic's history. Force of will, and that is that going to come up as a there we go, that's, yeah, this is the cycle I was trying to think of. So yeah, there is a variability here on the casting cost. Actually, for some reason I just was under the impression they were all that same template, but they're not. So these are what they are all. Well, no, hang on. So we got what, 4 or 5 drops and a 3 drop, yeah. Incinerate, something else we have seen before. Stops regeneration. You can burn any. There's been. Well, if you wonder what this is, there's been a number of oversized cards printed in Magic history over, 100, says there's 148 here, but have cropped up for various reasons. Obviously, one time, for most people now playing now, or well, say now, but if you remember the original Commander product, they came with oversized cards. So outside of the product, there's been other cards which have oversized versions as well. But you can see there's a number of cards that are really similar to this. This is better than, say, Fire Ambush, Lightning Strike, Searing Spear, similar to Lightning Bolt. The difference here is, of course, the cannot regenerate clause, but of course it costs more than a Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt, fantastic card. 3 damage any target for 1 red mana. Awesome. And another cycle as well. The original boons. Open fire, 2 in a red, 3 damage to target creature or player. Obviously this is better than open fire, this card. And then Volcanic Hammer. So if we look at all the red stuff, that stops regeneration. Also, you'll notice I didn't stipulate these needed to be monocolour, but looking at this, apart from that one has black mana in it, so do those, additional mana. So most of them look like they're mono red. To be careful with this, you want that. Because if you just put colour in there, it's just looking at the casting cost colour, not the colour identity. That's why I have to use ID. And you can see that's stapled to a number of different cards. So these aren't all the same type of card. Right, let's get on to some creatures. So what we've got here, 3/3 for 4, but unaffected by summoning sickness. So yeah, you can see why it would be in a mono red deck here. Aggressive mono red deck. Similar to Raging Minotaur. And you can see there, it's Raging Minotaur. This is the Magic the Gathering Online version, Mastered Edition 3. That's actually the original ones from Portal. But it is, the same card. If you look at, let's just go back here to this, and then we take a look at the Oracle text. It's been updated. This only has ever cropped up in 6th edition or beatdown box deck. Now, of course, if you were to look at, so this is a good opportunity in here. We've spoken about French vanillas before. What's this related to Raging Minotaur? But one thing that is it's going to be interesting to do here, and again, I think I'm just going to purely, because this is a mono red deck, initially I think I'll focus on red cards. So, and red creatures, obviously, and then we want power equal to 3, toughness equal to 3, and then the CMC of 4. So let's just see what comes up. And what you'll probably notice with these is I'll just do mono red. As we move through the history of Magic, you're getting sort of more for your money. Yeah. I mean, mixed in amongst this, there are obviously vanilla 3/3s for 4. But you can see there are a number of 3/3s for 4 where they have some very interesting utility. And of course, the other thing we can do is, if we do this and start to see at what point you start to see downsides creeping in once you sort of get below the above the curve. So these are 3/3 for 3, and even those you can see if you go back. So some of the earliest 3 for 3 had downsides on them. As you go through Magic's history, it's interesting, you start to actually see, this is a bit confusing because it's actually a flip card, but in addition to any that might be vanillas, for three vanillas, you might start to see actually they're getting more powerful. They've got an additional utility added to it. You know, you're seeing like 3/3s for 3 with haste. And other things as well. Did I make a mistake now? I should have redone. That would have been a better thing to do. And then if we say, well, you get 3/3s for 2, then you start to see, for a lot of these, there's some, you know, downside. Because, you know, having a 3/3 out on turn 2, yeah. And well, you know, we might as well satisfy our curiosity. What are there any 3/3s for 1? And we've got Cinderwall, so it's a 3/3. It's actually a wall, so it's got defender. At this point, it was always assumed that walls were defender or had defender. It wasn't until, you know, a little bit later they added it in additionally. So you've got Cinderwall, so defender, but also if it blocks, it gets destroyed at end of combat. And then you've got things like Slumbering Dragon. So yeah, 1 to cast, 3/3, but then there's all these other conditions. If we take off this, you can see there's a number of other cards in other colours, which, you know, have additional cost to them. I'd be most surprised, but you never know. Yeah, they're all in weird situations. This is not. As long as you've discarded a card this turn, you may pay black-red to cast this spell. What was that from? Modern Horizons. Okay. Raging Minotaur. Yeah, we've already seen did I make a mistake there? Why is that? Interesting. I'm sorry about that, actually. Yeah, we were looking at that, weren't we? That's why. Yeah, I was thinking that wasn't in the deck. Okay, yeah, that was because we were looking at Raging Minotaur. Phew. Viashino Sandstalker. Okay. Unaffected by Summoning Sickness, 4/2 for 3. At the end of turn, bounce it back. You can see it's cropped up in, you know, a couple of core sets, also in the mystery booster. Interestingly, yeah, so it's tagged as Ball Lightning. Also got Bounce Self. I'm sure so these are all cards which do similar things to Ball Lightning. They come into play. They got Trample Haste on them, and they get. And the reason, well, they got, sorry, not just Trample, but Haste specifically, but in the case of Ball Lightning, Trample as well. So it's a high damage 1-turn creature. That's how it's tagged up in here. So yeah, something forces you for it to come out of play end of turn, and as a consequence of that, it's obviously got to have something in it that you can do or activate or triggers on the turn it comes into play, so it can actually do stuff on that turn. And of course, in the case of a creature, that's going to be haste. You can see some of these creatures that generate, a ball lightning thing. And then we've got Groundbreaker, which is the colour shifted version. Searing Spear Askari. It's got evasion. It's got flanking in this as well. Gains Menace. A reference by Blazing Blade Askari. There's also alliteration in there. And again, you can look at with red creatures in mono red decks. It's interesting to see when you're looking at this card, there's a 2/2 for 3 with these upsides on it. But if you were to examine that part of the curve, so if we do power of 2 with a toughness of 2, in red, we'll stick with mono red, I think. Just roughly put this in order. And then, of course, what you can do is play around with the CMC to see what the relative upsides, downsides are as you move through the CMCs. So, 1 drops for 2/2, well, you would think that there is going to be some sort of condition on there as well that counteracts the fact that you're getting a 2/2 out potentially, or conceivably on turn 1. And then of here we've got the red bears, I suppose. So a lot more of those. And then here, so often, 2/2s for 3 referred to grey ogres. It's the nickname for that. And then as you go through, if you're paying more for it, then hopefully you're going to see a corresponding ability there that gives something in addition to just the body, because you're paying more for it. And again, interesting to go through. You can sort of work your way through, and you can see how this falls off. If you're getting a 2/2 for 6, what is it giving you? And if we go, clearly nothing above that. So another flanker here. French vanilla. So with French vanilla, it's creatures and vehicles that have only keyworded abilities. So another 2/2 for 3, but with these additional abilities, including haste, super useful. Dwarven Miner, another card I think we have looked at before actually. Similar to Dwarven Blast Miner. So these are interesting, creatures which have land destruction on them. Trenchworm is another card. So if we look at removal, land destruction here, but then only look at, say, creatures. And we can go through the various colours here and see how they might combine up. So if we look at the sort of cards that have white in the casting cost, are there any mono white cards that have the potential to destroy land, either because they specifically say they can destroy land or they just can destroy any permanent? And you've got Pentarch Paladin here, but you can see there's a condition on that. You have to basically choose a colour. All the other white cards have some other colour, either in the casting cost or the activation cost. So if we move into blue, here again, there's another colour involved. I suppose specifically the presence of red. If we move on to black, you can see there are some mono black cards, and when I did the No Hand No Land series way back in the early days of the channel, you'll probably recognise there was, I think, one card that I talked about, which was Helldozer. You've also got things like Army Ants as well, which that's actually a black-red card. And then when you move into red, then you start to see slightly more mono-coloured cards that destroy, land, or in this case non-basic land, or are worded in a way that they would be able to destroy a land. Non-basic land. It's interesting, these evoke creatures as well. And then if you take a look at green creatures, whether that's a thing, then you recognise things like acidic slime and mould shambler. Acidic slime because it can destroy artifacts, enchantments, or a land, and mould shambler target non-creature permanents. And you can see here, I think most of these are going to be because they reference destruction of permanents. There's a few, like here, it's islands or swamps. Deus of Calamity has a red in it, as does Ravager Worm. We've got Reaper King coming up again. And then things like Woodfall Primus, which has this persist on it. And you remember I was mentioning earlier about cards in Magic's history which have that coming back from the graveyard with a counter on it, and then when they die again they don't go into the graveyard, they go so in the case of the one we saw already, they're exiled, but some of these just do actually die. So with the persist, when it dies, if it had no -1/-1 counters on it, then you return it. However, if it has a -1/-1 counter on it, then it does go to the graveyard like normal. Goblin Tinkerer. Yeah, a few of these creatures which have artifact destruction on them. It's similar to Goblin Archaeologist, although there's the flip a coin thing. Interesting how it's also got this destroy target artifact, but then also it's dealing an amount of damage equal to the casting cost to Goblin Tinkerer. So it's inevitably, I suppose, depending on the type of artifact, it's going to blow Goblin Tinkerer up. And often you see that on these red creature cards where there's a number of them that end up like destroying themselves. There's almost this chaotic element to red creatures that destroy things. Let's just have a look and see what we can see in that sort of area. So I will do red. Let's go through the colour pie again as well, because I quite like doing that. Yeah, so there's some interesting cards in white that can deal with, in this case we are talking about artifacts, but there's a few here that do other things as well, like enchantments, and a combination of different things. So that's definitely something over Magic's history you will see on white cards. Although with you can see here several that it's going to be conditional on certain things, either the type of thing it's destroying in terms of where it is on the colour pie, or there might be an additional price to pay beyond just the activation cost. If you move into blue, you can see invariably it's with combination of another colour. There's two here which have green in them, so no doubt when we get to green we'll see that. If we move into black, there's our mates, Timber and Fiends. Rats of Wrath, bizarrely destroying a target artifact, creature or land that you control. And that was in Tempest, so next block. Oh, Joven. Yes, indeed. So much more. So, dragons start to feature, and and cards that were in artifact-heavy sets as well. You get these, red cards that have ways of dealing with artifact decks where artifacts are a thing in a particular set. And then if we move into green, no surprise to see it having hate on artifacts as well. And a lot of these people probably recognise, particularly because of Acidic Slime, Mould Shambler, cards that are popular in EDH. But quite a number of other things as well. There was one I spotted earlier actually, which I was curious about. Oh, Qasali, of course, Qasali Pride Mage. If you want to mess about with Exalted and good old Glisser. And you've got things like Scavenger Folk, very scary artwork. Keeper of Kookus, single red, 1/1 for 1 with protection from red, so good against red decks. And a number of cards that gain protection. I think isn't it something that you sometimes, there's a number of cards that just inherently have protection without it being activated. There's some knights, aren't there, that have that. There's also those, is it the voice cards, which have, let me just try this. I've gone a bit outside of red here, but never mind. Yeah, that's the ones I'm thinking of. Voice of duty, voice of grace, voice of law, voice of reason, which just inherently had protection on them in the appropriate colours. And then you had this voice of all. Now that first cropped up, was it in plane shift originally, or was it before then? No, yeah, plane shift. It's in these 10th edition decks. I also remember it as being a card in, I think it was one of the first of the, I'm trying to think of the name of the game now that was available on the PS3 originally, and then the Xbox, and also on PCs. But there was that, you know, they kept releasing those Magic the Gathering, was it Jewels, I think it was called? I should know because I've got all of them, but they keep changing the name slightly. But I remember this being, I think, in one of the decks actually. We've got Goblin Soothsayer, another 1/1 for 1 there. Sack Outlet Creed, Tribal Goblin. Yeah, I mean, so that's where, you know, obviously the card itself cares about goblins here. You're sacking a goblin to give all red creatures +1/+1 until end of turn. But, you know, just thinking about 1/1s for 1 in red generally. I mean, if you were to do ID is red, and then type of creature, CMC of 1. Power 1 and toughness 1. $154 cards. And once again, if you were to put them in chronological order, you'll probably again see, as Magic as we get more up to date, you're getting more for your 1/1 for 1. You'll also notice that this other thing, if I do that, let me just see, take out that. So you have Memnite, which is 0 for a 1/1. And then there's a number of other creatures like this, CMC 0, which are power 1. Actually, that's the only one. So there we go, yeah. So just gonna, so you can probably see when they first appeared. So legends. And then moving on to some of the other sideboard stuff here. I think I've also probably inadvertently gone through. Let me just recheck. Try and get myself orientated. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. So we've got Tremor, which was in the sideboard. So worse than Blazing Volley. So you can see there's a couple of red cards that are tagged up here, which do this sort of 1 damage to, you know, all the creatures, in this case without flying. And you can see here it references the tag. There's a tag called Earthquake. Because the first time we saw it was on Earthquake. Wand of Denial. So you've got the top of the library, Shenanigans. Look at the top card of target player's library. If that card is an online card, you may pay 2 life, put it into that player's graveyard. So it's a mill effect with life payment. And yeah, there's a number of cards that have, you know, the 2 on them, although it's not always the case that it's going to cost you life. And of course you can see that's tied into the cost. Yeah, so we've got things like Atrocious Experiment. So 2 in a black, target player mills 2 cards, draws 2. Sorry, target player mills 2 cards, draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. So they lose, gain, lose sort of thing. Yeah, you can see it's stapled to creatures there. Nothing else in that combination, however, that it appears you could play in a red deck. If you were to just purely look at the mill stuff and then do like colourless mill effects in without necessarily tying them to life as well, then you can see there's quite a number of other cards where that's a thing, particularly things like Grindstone and Millstone, and if you put them in order and do our old friend with that, you can see like Millstone's the first like artifact mill card. But then there's another number of other cards which combine up the mill effect with something else as well. I don't know if anybody remembers Keening Stone. That was from Rise of the Eldrazi. Wildfire Emissary. Protection from white. It's got a fire breathing effect on it. And that crops up an awful lot in Magic. And I'm sure I've been through here before, but you can sort of see again, you know, what colours and whether or not it needs a colour combination for the different colours of mana as to where fire breathing turns up. And yeah, definitely more of a red thing. It is interesting when you get the odd card like there's this, you know, mono green card with fire breathing from Ice Age. Subterranean Spirit. Yeah, as I said at the start, lots of really interesting utility on these cards. Yeah, and that has an earthquake effect on it again. So I didn't really look here. So we've got 2 cards in the deck which have earthquake. One's just a non-creature spell, and the other is a creature with it stapled to it. So if you were to look at creatures, so we've got 22 cards which have, or tagged up as being earthquake effects, but in this one I've narrowed it down to be just creatures. It's interesting, we've got a blue card there cropping up. But this is the manageable amount. You can see here, you know, predominantly red. We've got a red-green, we've got a blue-red, and we have this blue one. So 3 in a blue. It is a wall, so it's defender. 0/5. Gains flying. If it gains flying, bury it. If it leaves play, it deals to each non-blue creature without flying 2 damage for each 2 islands you control. So this weird conditional earthquake effect. Oh, there's fire ants. Do we see it on yeah, we do see it on a dragon. As I'm thinking, that earthquake effect is a cool thing to have on a dragon. Like, makes a thematically makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering if do we get... No, not on an artifact. Although we could probably find variations. It is on enchantment. Builder's Bane. All these XX red spells. Yeah. So burn player, remove, destroy artifact. So similar to by force, destroy X target artifacts. So this is an X and a red. This XX red. Oh yeah, for each artifact put into graveyard in sway, Builder's Bane deals 1 damage to that artifact's controller. Okay. Release the Gremlins. This one's destroying artifacts and then creating tokens. And Fiery Confluence is a modal spell. Which each creature, so that's a modal spell which has Earthquake on it, or 2 damage to each opponent, or destroy target artifact. Interesting. Yeah, and this is going to come up with the same sort of thing, really. Yep. I've looked at that before, already. Bogardan Phoenix. Death trigger self, reanimate self. Oh, the good old unique counters. Oh, these cards use a... Oh, that was it, wasn't it? I was talking about, yeah, like building a EDH deck which has strange counters on it. So these apparently are cards that have unique counters. If we were just thinking about creatures... Oops. There's 53. Excuse me. What's the most recent one? Ribbon counters, okay. And in terms of a thing in red, there we go. Smouldering Egg has ember counters. There's quite a few multicoloured cards here, actually. Oh, that was right, Mine Layer. It does mine counters, doesn't it? Whenever a land with a mine counter when it becomes tap, destroy it. When Mine Layer leaves play, I don't think I ever spoke about that in the No Hand No Land deck. Maybe I was more interested in stuff that just blew land up straight away without this delay. How much is that? 350 from Odyssey. And then of course there's quite a number of cards with reanimate self on them. In terms of cards that have red in them, okay, so first red card there where that was the case. So this is interesting. This does look like, by the border, this looks like one of the colour shifted cards. So, oh yeah, Ivory Gargoyle, there you go. And you see reanimation in white, so that does make sense. Yeah, some of these colour shifted cards from this set, was it Planar Chaos, I find are slightly easier to spot than others. I mean, when you see the set alongside itself, they pop out better. But when they're like this, alongside other cards where the frames often are changed a bit over time, it is harder to spot. I mean, I think from what I remember now, as I think about it, the giveaway is, isn't it, that this area here is a much darker shade of the particular colour of mana than, say, this. You know, you can see red in this, slight redness, but this clearly is very red. So yeah, that's now I've had a chance to think about it and seen it alongside other cards. So for the other colours, the same would be true. So the white ones are a lot whiter in this area, and so on. Blue, and black, and so on. I've got a sneaking suspicion somehow I've missed something here, which I think is the Sand Golem. Builder's Bane we looked at. Wildfire Emissary. Yeah, let's look at that. So 5 for a 3/3, but under a certain condition comes into play with a counter on it. Gains PP counters, hate discard, reanimates another reanimates self card, but conditionally on it being in the graveyard as a result of it being discarded. I mean, I suppose it does make me a little bit curious, first of all, how many fall into this category that are also, oops, I keep doing that, don't I? Okay, so there's a few there that have something that will interrupt with the graveyard, or when it dies. There's our Sand Golem. If we go back, the other thing I wanted to look at, I think it's here, was, and you can see, yeah, I had a feeling there's tons of these that gain counters, because there's lots of different scenarios in which counters get put on creatures. I mean, here it's all plus counters. But of course there's other sorts of counters that can get put on when a creature dies. Yeah, so there we have it. Hopefully I haven't forgotten any other cards. I'm sure that's bound to happen again at some point. So thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in the next video.